Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
I'm an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. My name is Jack Kissell. And I'm delighted to be here, and I said yes immediately, and I hope I'm a good member of AA. There may be a couple of small reasons why I was so quick to say that, and I'll explain it as we go. But I'm very comfortable here today. I want to thank the committee and Bruce and everybody who was involved in getting me and also in getting most of the other people, because as it turns out, I feel very much at home in this particular convention. Tomorrow morning, Bob is from Indianapolis, and I was born and raised in South Bend, so that makes him sort of a homeboy, as far as I'm concerned, and or Joe rather, and then Bob was in L.A. and California. We refer to sponsees as babies. I'm not sure you do that here, but Bob was my sponsor's baby, older than I in the program, so I know him. The speaker that follows Bob, I know her very well, and yeah. And I sponsor the guy that's speaking tomorrow night, and the woman who is speaking on Sunday morning was delivered to me out of an elevator outside of an AA meeting. It was a friend of mine named Ron. The elevator opened, he pushed her out, and he said, "Jack, take care of this one, I gotta go." And he left. And I helped her into her first meeting. So, I'm at home on this slate for first time maybe at any conference that I've had the privilege to be a part of, so I'm delighted to be here. And there is another reason why I was so quick. I didn't know any of that. But there is a young fellow who just turned 9 who moved back to Grand Island from L.A., whose sponsor I sponsor. And he and his Al-Anon lived below my son and his wife, and my granddaughter is Jackie's best friend. That's just the way it is. And so when they said Omaha, I said yes, and immediately made plans to bring Paloma with us. So she's here, and she's 4, and she and Jackie are having a reunion, and so I was just delighted to be a part of this. And AA has been giving me surprises and gifts for a long, long time, and so that's the order of tonight's business. Let me share that. So I didn't really expect to be a member for very long, if at all, because, and it wasn't that I didn't have any difficulties. I had plenty of problems, when I got here. I had been arrested 10 times. I mean, it's not a record, but it ain't bad, And the first one was when I was 17. That was after I had been drinking for 6 months. Not too long ago, I spoke out in Desert Hot Springs at Turnoff, where the age limit is 18. I mean, the oldest person there is 18. And I had to explain to him, to that group, how it was that I got started drinking so late in life. I didn't get started till I was 16. I have a friend who's sober 3 years by then, and she's got 18 years. So what happened, the reason I got started so late in life is that I had begun acting alcoholically before I ever started drinking. I have had that kind of personality And one of the traits that's fairly common among alcoholics is a kind of a devious attitude toward problems. I have never been real straightforward in my dealings with myself or others. And when I was 13 and going on 14, I realized that I absolutely hated living in our house in South Bend. My father was an alcoholic. I hated his behavior, but I felt powerless to control it. And he was brutalizing my mother and a lot of stuff that I just hated. And so I wanted to get out of that house, and I decided to run away from home, but I've always been kind of devious, so I wanted to find a socially acceptable way to leave home at 14. And if you're Irish Catholic in South Bend, Indiana, there is no more socially acceptable way than to go study to be a priest at Notre Dame. So that's what I did when I was 14. I was out there for 2.5 years, 20 hours of silence a day from the ages of 14 through 16, trying not to think about girls. Finally I said, what an order, I can't go through with it. And I came home, and I found my real vocation the next night, which was drinking. I went out, started drinking at 16, and I mean, if there had been a kind of an objective observer that evening, it would have been clear to them that I had a problem, because I had a number of symptoms develop and make themselves known that very first night. Among them, my first blackout occurred that night. Now, there are a lot of people in AA, there are people in this room, full-fledged members of Alcoholics Anonymous, who have never experienced a blackout. I mean, I know that. And on those occasions, when I suspect there are a few people who are alcoholic but never experienced one of those, I like to just give them an idea of what it's like. In my case, it was a period of time ranging anywhere from a half an hour to 5 days, during which I was extremely active and not present. You know what I mean? I mean, it's a weird thing. Wake up in the middle of a fist fight, not know whose side you're on. You know? Find yourself driving 90 miles an hour down a highway and not know whether you're chasing or being chased. It's very strange. And I had one about an hour and a half that first night. Other things happened too. As soon as I began drinking, I got wild, and suddenly, you know, the seminarian disappeared, and I became just kind of crazy, and I attacked this one guy, and then I attacked his car. I mean, I shattered the windshield of his car with the heel of my shoe, and I was just trying to kill somebody, and it took 3 guys to subdue old 5, 6, and 120, because I just got maniacal, you know. They did subdue me. They got me into the car and put me on the floor, and 2 guys sat in the back seat and held me to the floor with their feet, and the third one drove me home. And on the way home, I experienced a personality change. I just became warm and wonderful. And I cried. And I threw up on his floor. And they got me to my house, and they helped me out of the car and helped me up the front steps, and they leaned me against the front door of my house like a thing and pushed the doorbell and ran, because they didn't want to deal with my father. And my father opened the door, and here was his oldest son, 16, ex-seminarian by 1 day, drunk. And he did the only thing he knew how to do. He punched me out. And that was my first night of serious drinking. And I loved it. And I loved it. I never skipped a drink for the next 25 years to the best of my ability. You know, I was just off and gone. And it just continued. There were plenty of problems. That arrest at 17 was for manslaughter. I didn't go to trial for it. It got arranged. I lied about the accident, and the little girl who had been with me in the car lied, and a deputy sheriff in St. Joe County perjured himself. He was just trying to help a bright young 17-year-old. I was from a poor family, and I'd won a scholarship to the university, and he didn't want to interrupt my promising career. He helped me to evade the consequences of my actions. He helped me to avoid my responsibilities. And I was an alcoholic full-blown by then, so when I realized that I had skated through that and also knew I was guilty, out of gratitude and guilt, I went out and got loaded that night, because I'm an alcoholic, and it's just the way it was. And a lot of my troubles began to pile up then. By the time I found you, or you found me, I'm never sure which it was, I had been arrested 10 times. I totaled 12 cars. I guess I used to think I was a test pilot for General Motors. I never did get those things to fly. I bounced them and rolled them and flipped them, but I never got them to fly. I had not worked for 3 years. I used to refer to myself as a functioning alcoholic, but that's somebody that's married to somebody that does work. See, that's how that is. And she was planning to divorce me at the time, and the 4 children were not speaking to me. They had gotten together in my house, little house in Hollywood, and told me that they didn't love me, want me, or need me. They had a suitcase packed for me. They told me to get the hell out of their lives and to leave their mother alone. I was killing her. The youngest was 7, the oldest was 20. My liver was failing. I had been hallucinating for about a year and a half. Other than that, my life was going pretty well, So it wasn't that I didn't have problems. I had plenty of problems. I got the very last arrest occurred a day before I got 12-step. That is actually the only arrest that I have ever had any doubts about. I mean, I didn't contest any of them, but that one, it still seems to me that they really may not have had probable cause that night. Because all that happened was that my extreme caution while driving drew the attention of the heat to me that night. I sat through 3 green lights waiting for the right one, Now, they thought that was a little strange, and so they pulled me over and discovered to nobody's surprise that I was drunk. I measured 2.7 that night, thank you. And so the next day, as it happens, I was put in touch with a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He was living up in Oxnard and working at a detox center up there, and Gene had gotten the phone number, and I talked to him on the phone, and some odd things started happening right then with him. I mean, he said things, and I responded in ways that were very unlike me. For example, he said to me right off the bat, I said, "Hi, my name is Jack," and he said, "My name is Bud. I'm an alcoholic. Can I help you?" And I said, "Maybe. I'm not like that. I mean, that's not a response of mine. I don't want your help. Just leave me alone. Don't bother with me or bother me." And this guy said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Maybe." And then he gave me an order. "Please don't tell me what to do. I don't like orders. I don't follow them. I'm defiant and rebellious. It's just the way I am. I used to run red lights for drill. You know what I mean? I just don't like to be told what to do." And this guy said, "Don't drink before you come and see me." And I said, "Okay." And I didn't. I knew that if I was more than an hour and a half away from a drink, or at least a little dope or something, that I lost control. So I convinced Gene to drive, because I knew I'd be shaking by the time we got there, and I was. And we got there, and this guy sat us down, in his office and told us what it used to be like, what happened and what it was like then for him. He had a year and a half of sobriety at the time. And his sobriety didn't particularly impress me. I'm not sure I even noticed it. But I did notice a couple of things as he talked to me about himself. And one of them was that this man seemed to me to be the first person I had ever met who knew what it felt like to be me at 3 a.m. I didn't think anybody knew that. And I had deliberately tried to keep people from finding that out in that sort of ambivalent way that some of us have. I wanted to know what was the matter with me, but at the same time I couldn't face it. I mean, for example, I was in therapy in New York for 3 years, and I never missed an appointment. I was never late. On the other hand, I felt it was my job in that therapy to make sure that the therapist never found out a damn thing about me. Well, that's not going to help a lot, And so, I had this mixture. And Bud talked about himself, and I recognized some of the things going on in him were true of me. So I listened to him with a little more respect than I maybe wanted to. And he convinced me to stay at the detox center that night. Well, I think Jean had a little bit to do with that. She was the only one working. She had the keys to the only car. And she said, that I should stay there. And I knew I had the choice of staying at the detox that night or walking back from Oxnard, which is 77 miles. So I decided to stay, and I did. And the next day, we didn't have the money for this place, so they moved me out to 12-step house. And the next day, at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, I was standing underneath a palm tree, and I had just successfully completed the AA program. Oh, yeah, well, he explained how it worked. He said you do it one day at a time. And I had just done that. 24 hours, a whole day, without anything at all. Nothing at all. And I didn't like it. And I decided to resign from the organization. But he had extracted a promise from me. He got me to promise that I would read the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, before I took another drink. And I didn't want to leave that place with any obligations left over, so I said, all right, I'm going to go in and read the book. Now, I've told you a couple of my symptoms. Another one that was very major part of my alcoholism was that I had become by then an intellectual, which I now define as someone who has been educated beyond his capacity. But in those days, it was a very serious thing. It was a desperate effort on my part to gain some control. If I could understand the nature of the human psyche or the universe, maybe I could gain some control. And I had been out of control since I was 16 years old. And it was also an effort on my part to impress you. And I desperately needed to impress you, because I had been filled with self-loathing as long as I can remember. I always needed that relief of impressing you. It's the only way I ever got any relief. And so for those reasons, I was an intellectual, and I got the book, and I opened it up, and I immediately saw that it did not meet my literary standards. It was just too plain-spoken, and I thought simple-minded, to be of any use to somebody of my complexity, don't you see? So, I could find stuff in there to just ridicule. It suggested in that book that I should substitute for my drinking. I mean, I gave you a little hint about my drinking. And I should substitute for my drinking the fellowship. I mean, it's just not going to work in my case. Let's start with the fact that I don't like people, okay? I mean, hanging out with you is hardly going to keep me sober. I didn't even like the word fellowship, you know. Sounded to me like a Baptist softball team. I don't want to be part of your fellowship. Thanks a lot. And I could see through that book's feeble efforts to hide its real intent behind euphemisms like higher power. That book was trying to cram God down my throat. And I didn't believe in God. And I didn't think you should either. One of my little entertainments in those days was to go to bars named Molly Malone's or Barney's Beanery and find some big Irish Catholic and get him into a discussion. I'd say, do you believe in God? He'd say, oh, yeah. I'd say, a loving, just, and merciful God, right? I'd say, right. I'd say, yeah. What about malformed children and disease and war and poverty and bigotry and death? Where's your loving God? Usually about then, he would beat me up to show me there was a power greater than myself. And that was the attitude with which I read the book. And in spite of that, when I got to page 21, for the first time ever, it became clear to me the truth about me. Now, as I say, I had been trying to kind of figure that out in some ways. I had been perfectly willing to be diagnosed in a variety of ways. I had been willing to be called a paranoid schizophrenic or manic depressive, a psychopath, sociopath, artist, any of those diagnoses. And on page 21, it described what it called a real alcoholic. It says they are seldom mildly intoxicated, usually more or less insanely drunk. It says they do absurd, tragic, incredible things. It says they are disgustingly, even dangerously antisocial. It talks about the Jekyll and Hyde personality and our lousy timing, all in one paragraph. And by the time I finished that paragraph, for the first time ever, it became very clear to me, that's exactly who I am. I'm an alcoholic. That's how I've been living my life. So I started to read the book with a bit more care. And I got to page 24, and it said there that I'm going to drink again. It's very clear. It says the real alcoholic has lost the power to choose whether they will drink or not. It says they have no mental defense against the first drink. Well, I mean, I was hallucinating. I wasn't working, but I was never stupid. I mean, I can figure that out. It means I'm going to drink. And when I do, I'm going to relive page 21 over and over again. It is the darkest moment I can remember. Because I saw the problem, but I saw your solution wouldn't work for me. In spite of the fact that those sentences occur in a chapter called There is a Solution. It's just that your solution wouldn't work for me. So what the hell was I going to do? The only thing I could do, I decided I at least could go to your meetings. I knew I wouldn't like them, but I'd go. And I did. That very night, I went to my first meeting. And I liked the meetings from the gate. I loved the speaker meetings. I like to hear the adventure stories. One guy got up and said, I stole a battleship. Now, you got to like a guy like that. You know what I mean? I've been thinking lately, how would you like to have an oil spill on your amends list? You know? Holy. Gee, there's Mom and Dad and Alaska, my God. So I like the meetings. And I tried to hear some hints about how do you stop drinking? How do you not drink? And one of the hints I got was get a sponsor. So I did that. Got a sponsor right away. And then I realized that he didn't have enough education to deal with somebody of my complexity. As a matter of fact, it's kind of embarrassing to admit this in front of Bob here because, you know, he was there before I was with Fred. I gave Fred a quiz to see if he was qualified to deal with me. Now, I didn't actually tell him it was a test, but I asked him a kind of a complicated question about the psychological interrelatedness of the steps. Let's see how he does with that. And Fred looked at me with these huge, gentle eyes, and he said, "Jack, the steps are numbered for the intellectuals." If you will do them in order, they will work. I thought that was a pretty good answer, so I didn't fire him. You know, truth is, in a day or so, I got enough confidence in Fred to tell him the truth. And I said, the truth is, I can't work the second step. I mean, I can't come to believe that there is a power that will restore me. And Fred gave me another one of those inappropriate answers of his. He always answered every question I ever asked him. It's just that his answers and my questions never seemed to match, you know. I'll give you an example. One time, I was about 3 months sober, and I had a fight with my wife. And I called Fred, and I explained to him in great detail all of the unforgivable things that she had said to me, all of the rotten names she called me. I made it very clear to him what a vicious bitch I was married to, you know. And I knew what he was going to say. Well, you know, you're 3 months sober and you're very vulnerable. What you need to do is move out of that house. And instead, what he said is, all right, now you go to her and you say, I'm a sick son of a bitch, but I'm trying. I said, Fred, I don't think you heard what I told you, you know. And I told him again everything she said. He said, no, I got it. Do what I said. And, I mean, I was trying to follow his guidance. I didn't want to drink. And so I found her out in the kitchen. She was standing there at the kitchen sink with her back to me, slamming pots. She used to call that washing the dishes, you know. And I stood there behind her, and I tried to say what he told me to say, and my throat closed. I really tried. I could not get it out. Finally, I gave up, and I went into the dining room, and I found a slip of paper, and I wrote it out on a slip of paper. Slipped it into her Al-Anon book. Oh, it was the best I could do. To give you an idea of the kind of program she was working at the time, it took her 3 weeks to find it. Yeah, well, I felt better, I must admit, and so I'm talking to Fred on this day, and I said, you know, I just can't work the second step. And he gave me another one of those answers. He said, go to the meetings and search for God. God comes to me through other people. I said, oh, okay. Thanks a lot. What is that? Go to the meetings? Of course God comes to Fred through other people. How else would he get it? The man hardly reads. But I didn't want to drink. I was willing to do what he said. And I went to the meetings and I searched for God. I didn't find him, but I looked. I listened to the speakers with great intensity in the hopes that one of them would unlock that mystery for me. They didn't do it. It seemed to me, and I know this is a misconception, but it did seem to me that each speaker I heard during that Search for God period had about a third-grade education. They all got sober in Tyler, Texas, and they were dispensing folk wisdom. This one guy got up, I swear, and said, if you don't believe in a power which is greater than yourself, then jump up and stay there. What the hell is that? I didn't think that was funny. I'm sitting out there trying to find God, and this guy is telling me that gravity will restore me to sanity, you know. I don't see how that's going to work. About the only thing I really could hang on to is something else Fred had told me, and that is, no matter what. He said, no matter what, don't use, don't drink, no matter what. I said, okay, I'll do that. And I made lists of no matter whats. If those 4 children never do speak to me again, I will not use, I will not drink. No matter what. If I never am able to work again, I will not use or drink. No matter what. If my wife of 17 years goes through with her plan to divorce me, I will not use, I will not drink. If she stays, I will not use, I will not drink. No matter what. If my mind is never restored to me, I will not use or drink. And I mean, it took me 90 days to memorize the Serenity prayer. I could not hold it in my head. And my hallucinations did not disappear the day I got sober. I remember sitting next to Fred on an August night at the Brentwood meeting on a Thursday night, and a huge black bug came flying right at me and then darted between my sponsor and me, and we ended up looking at each other. I didn't say anything. The first thing that was said, Fred said. He looked at me and he said, "It was really there, Jack." I didn't ask him, you know. I'd be damned if I'd asked him. I was pleased to hear it, but I would not ask him. I said, no matter what. No matter what. And when I was 30 days clean and sober, I had a spiritual experience. It consisted of being 30 days clean and sober. I mean, I really cannot do that. I never could. I never did. It just amazed me. I was 30 days clean and sober, an incredible length of time. And that is a spiritual experience precisely as it is described in that most profound of books, Alcoholics Anonymous. In a rather obscure section of our book called Appendix 2, where it says we tapped an unsuspected inner resource which we presently came to identify with our own conception of a power greater than ourselves. Some of our religious-minded members call that God conscious. And I had tapped an unsuspected inner resource that made it possible for me to stay sober an incredible length of time. 30 days in a row. I couldn't get over it. And I went to Fred. I said, you know, I think I'm working the second step. He wasn't all that impressed. He said, go and work the third step. And I did. And I have been doing that ever since. Working the steps, practicing the principles to the best of my ability, and it's worked so far. You know, it's been working. It's been working for 19 days, 11 months, and 18 years. And I'm still here. And I'm grateful for every day, and I'm no less surprised at every day. It never surprises me when an alcoholic drinks. It amazes me when we don't. And, you know, it's an incredible thing. If that was all it was, if I had just somehow been allowed to not drink, it would be terrific. But it's a great deal more than that. I know there are new people here, and you may have already noticed that we're not real terrific at giving you some good techniques for not drinking. We don't even pay much attention to it. I mean, if you've gone up to an old-timer, we say kind of foolish things to you. You say, well, how do you stop drinking? And we say things like, don't pick up the first drink. Oh, good. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, that isn't really what AA is about. We're not so much about not drinking. What AA does is help us to live sober. That's a different deal altogether. You may have noticed, if you're new, or you may not have, that we don't work the steps in order to get sober. We stop drinking, and then we start working the steps in order to live. And so, Fred, with that weak education and 9 years of sobriety and a great deal of wisdom, began to teach me how to live. Right after the fifth step, he pointed some things out to me. One of them was something that I had not noticed, and that is that I was married. I had not noticed that. I had been unfaithful in that relationship for the entire 17 years, to the best of my ability, you understand. And he said, no, that's not how it works. If you want to stay sober, you have to be rigorously honest. And if you're married, that means that you have to be faithful. You're not being faithful to the woman, you're being faithful to the promise you made. And I said, well, okay, but the thing is, I mean, my motives weren't terrific, and I'm not even sure I really love her. And he said, oh, no, you don't. I said, well, how did you know? He said, you don't love anybody. You don't know how to do it. We're going to teach you how to do that. And we're going to start with you doing loving things where you are. And in your case, we're going to start very simply. We will start with politeness. If she cooks, can you say thank you? And I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. You know? And so he started to teach me how to do loving things where I was. And 3 years later, I called him to complain. I said, you know, I've been doing what you tell me, and I'm still sober, but, I mean, we're together now 20 years, and she still doesn't trust me. And he said, well, let's see, how long did it take you to teach her not to trust you? Well, we figured it was 17 years. So he said, fine. When you are 17 years clean and sober and faithful, then the score will be even. I said, thanks a lot. Okay. And kept on doing it. I bring it up for several reasons. One of them is that every time I have been willing to do what I've been asked to do in order to stay sober, it has worked. I'm still here, but there have also been gifts over and above that in living that I never knew about, didn't even expect. And one of them was in relation to the marriage. Because somewhere along the line, it dawned on me that in those first 17 years, I had essentially one experience with a variety of women. And in the last almost 19 years, I've had a variety of experiences with one woman. And I found out that's better. It just is better. It's more interesting. It's more adventuresome. It's just better. Fred died, it'll be 4 years. It was 4 years in March. And so he wasn't here to see it. But when I was 17 years, clean and sober and faithful, Gene gave me a little medallion that I still wear around my neck. It says 17, even. And we've been together now 36 years. And it's working, it's still working. Another of the things that he pointed out to me in that very early days, he had me do the 5th step when I was 6 weeks sober. I didn't know you could wait. I mean, he didn't tell me you could wait. When I was about a year and a half sober, I heard guys saying they still hadn't done it and they were going to get around one of the... And I went to Fred. I said, why did you make me do it so quick? And he said, oh, you didn't have much time. And I've learned that really was true. I've had the great good fortune to sponsor an awful lot of people in the last 19 years, and once in a while I've run across a few that seemed to me just didn't have much time, that they better get it done, or it wasn't going to take. So I guess I was one of those. But so I did that, and he said, if you want to stay sober, or if you just want to stay, if you want to be at all comfortable in your sobriety, you've got to give up your resentments. And one of the deep, major, long-term, long-lasting resentments that I held was toward my father. He had been dead a year, but I still hadn't forgiven him for being alive, It was just one of those things. And I didn't think I could let go of that. And Fred said, look, it isn't that he deserves it or not. It's that you deserve to be free of it. And he told me to try to be willing to let go of it. And I knew a little bit by then about trying to pray. I had learned that prayer isn't to get God's attention, it's to get mine. And so I started praying to be willing to forgive him. And I was driving along in the freeway one time, and on the freeway in Los Angeles, you have a lot of time to think, and suddenly I had this insight. And now, I know you're not going to find it Jungian in its profundity, but it blew me away. I suddenly realized that my father was an alcoholic. Now, I knew that when I was 4 years old. The new idea was that he had not chosen to be one either. I mean, I knew I hadn't. I knew I had not chosen to be an alcoholic. And I knew by then that my behavior was the result of my alcoholism, and that my behavior was worse than my dad's. Our disease is the only one I know that kills people that don't have it, and mine had done that. My disease had run rampant over people much more than my dad's. So I began to see him differently. And I now know that's what forgiveness is. It's seeing it differently. Chuck Chamberlain talked about a new pair of glasses. It's seeing it differently. And I began to see my father differently. And I went to Fred and I said, I think I'm beginning to forgive him. And he said, good. Now make amends. I said, no, you forgot. He's dead. He said, no, I knew that. I said, well, how am I supposed to make amends? And he gave me another one of those answers. He said, I don't know. Pray about it. Okay, Fred. And I started to pray about it. When I was 9 months sober, and my youngest daughter was 7, she came in the house and said she thought that somebody was dead on the front lawn. And I went out there and there was somebody dead drunk on the front lawn. And I rolled him out from underneath the bushes and I stood him up and walked him in the house, and Gene fed him soup and I fed him AA, and I 12-stepped him. And his name was Harold, and he got sober, and we took him out to Chandler Lodge, which is a 12-step house out there, and my sponsor got him a job, and Harold was sober, and Harold loved to be sober. He just, I'd bring him over to the house, and Gene would be vacuuming, and he was one of these guys that once he got sober, he just couldn't stop talking, He'd follow her all around the house telling her his story, you know. I was a boxer in Indiana, they called me the monkey bulldog, and he just went on and on. And she'd say, yes, Harold, and go on doing her vacuum. And after 6 weeks of his being sober, he got drunk again, and then he got arrested and got out and got drunk again, and he died with a bottle of wine in his hands and my phone number in his head and my sponsor's number in his pocket. And Harold was exactly the same age my father was when he died. And I knew there was a connection. And there was an odd little gift that came out of that I never expected. When I first got out of school, the only thing I ever wanted to do was be a writer. And I never did it because I was afraid. I'm an alcoholic, and if it isn't perfect, it isn't worth it. And I couldn't do it. I'd start and never finish. And Fred told me, it doesn't matter if it's good, it has to be finished. If you start something, you must finish it. And I started writing a little thing about Harold, and I finished it. And I sent it to the Grapevine, and they published it, and I was a writer. And I never expected that. And another little idea came to me. I'm going to start being friendly to some of these old-timers that remind me of my dad. And I started consciously trying to do that. I hope I've established a tradition in my area, because I'm getting up there now. But I picked out one guy especially, a guy named Matt Campion, used to come to our meetings, and he reminded me a little of my dad in some ways, and I started being friendly to him. And Matt died 37 years sober last year, and the last 9 years of his life, he asked me to speak at his birthday meeting. And it was an honor that I never expected. Just a gift. There's another guy, I sidled up to him at a meeting. He was older, and I thought he was new. And I approached him in that kind of patronizing way we sometimes have with new people. You know, I stuck out my hand and said, my name is Jack, what's yours? He said, Jimmy. And I said, hi, Jimmy. How long are you sober now? He said, let's see, it's 33 years. Oh, God. I said, oh, good. And but we got to be friends, and it was Jimmy Marr. And Jimmy came from the earliest days of Alcoholics Anonymous. He had been 12-step by Bill Wilson. The first speaker we ever heard was Fulton Alsler. I mean, he passed on to me some of the oral history of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was incredible. And I had the privilege of being the last member of the fellowship to speak to Jimmy. I called him at the Veterans Hospital and said, I love you, and I'll see you later. And an hour later he died, and I had been the voice, the last voice of AA that he heard. It was a gift I never would have expected. We went to the International Convention in New Orleans, and I noticed that Indiana was sponsoring a meeting. And my dad was in AA in Indiana for 10 years. He never got a year of sobriety, but he was active. And it occurred to me that would be an amends I could make. I'll go to the Indiana meeting. It won't be as sophisticated and as witty as a Southern California meeting, but I'll go. And I went, and the speaker was a guy named Lou, and he was an air conditioning repairman, and he had 17 years sobriety at the time, I remember, and it was a nice, simple story. It wasn't real sophisticated or witty. It was a good AA story. And I went up to him afterwards and thanked him as I had been taught to do. And I said, hi, my name is Jack Kissell, and Herb was my dad. And he looked at me with these huge, gentle eyes. And they began to fill with tears. And he said, you know, your father was not given in Alcoholics Anonymous what you and I have been given. But don't you be ashamed of him. He helped a lot of people, and I was one of them. He said, I used to, in the first 5 years of my sobriety, I used to go to the meetings and then go to your dad's house and play cards and talk AA. And I loved him. And he walked away. And that was a gift I hadn't expected. And as a result of trying to make some amends and seeing my father differently, I changed. I mean, I stopped hating the cops. You know, I stopped, I became a better employee and eventually a better employer. And I became a better father myself. And my alcoholism has done a lot of damage, and some of it to my children. Apparently, although the statistics are really against this, my 4 kids, none of them are alcoholic. I figure we're going to have a big crop of grandchildren, you know. But it doesn't look like any of the 4 of mine are alcoholic. But my alcoholism has done a lot of damage to them. And at least the most visible damage is my son. He was 12 when I got sober. That night I was trying to choose the right color of green and got arrested. John was in the front room of our house in the dark, hiding in the dark with a ball bat in his hands, waiting for me to come home in case he needed to defend his mother. He used to lock himself in his bedroom, then lock himself in a closet, cover himself with a blanket when he was 12. He couldn't stay in the same room with me for the first 1.5 years of my sobriety. But I kept going to the meetings and working the program as best I could. And he went to Alateen, and he kept working his program, and over the years it got better for both of us. He had a lot of trouble in school. He had difficulty getting out of high school, and then he wanted to go to college, and he flunked out, and then he went to work, and then he went back and tried again, and he managed to complete the 2-year community college. And he came to me, and I was 8 years sober at the time, and he said, you know, I know it isn't possible with my grades and all, but if it were, I would go to Notre Dame like you did because you did. It was his way of making amends to me. And when you walk in this path, no matter how falteringly it may be, odd, synchronistic things occasionally occur, and one did then. My mother, who still lives in South Bend, was sending me clippings from the local newspaper. I hadn't been there in 21 years, but you know how mothers are. And one of them was about my best friend in the seminary, who had stayed and become a priest, and he was now assistant provincial of the Holy Cross Order. That's number 2 man in the organization that owns and runs Notre Dame. So after 33 years, I called him. He was delighted to hear from me. He said, what have you been up to all these years? Oh, I didn't go into a lot of detail. I said, I guess the most significant thing is that I've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous for 8 years. And he said, gee, that's great. I've been sober for 10 years. Yeah. And as a direct result of his intervention, my son was allowed to enter Notre Dame in spite of his grades as a junior transfer. And 2 years later, his mother and I flew back to South Bend to watch him graduate with honors. He took us all over. He took us all over the campus trying to find professors that he knew to introduce us to because he was proud of us, you know. I went to an AA meeting with my friend Jack, the priest, and Lou, the guy from New Orleans, was leading the meeting. It was a gift I never expected. And John came home, and after graduation, and he continued. He went, when he was in South Bend, he established an Alateen group, and he was going to Al-Anon. He continued to go to Al-Anon, and he met an Al-Anon, and they got married, and now they have 2 little Al-Anons. And one of them is Paloma, and Paloma is the 4-year-old that's with us. And all of my children speak to me now. They all tell me they love me. And the grandchildren are coming. There are 5 of them. The oldest is 16. and the youngest is about a quarter. we have 5 1/4 grandchildren is what we've got. The youngest right this minute is 1.5 years, but there's another one on the way. And so the oldest is 16, and I'll be 19 years sober soon. So none of my grandchildren have ever seen me drink. They all think that an alcoholic is somebody that goes to meetings. When I go to a meeting, or when I'm leaving, Paloma will say to me, "Where are you going?" I say, "Well, I'm going to a meeting." "What should I tell them?" And she says, "Tell them keep coming back. It works." Yeah, it's a whole different thing from where I started. I didn't expect any of that. On Sunday nights, if we don't have an AA task to perform, John likes us to babysit his children while Deb goes to an Al-Anon meeting. And the reason he likes that is because I'm the one he trusts. And nobody could trust me when I got here. Not a soul, nobody. I remember, I don't know if she does, but I remember Yvonne, after I was sober, a few years, saying that I was the most hostile newcomer she ever met. And things have changed. Because I know now how to love. I'm even pretty good at it. I can love you, and I don't much care what your attitude is. And it's a gift that I didn't expect. Fred said, "Do loving things where you are," and I started doing that. And I started working with new people. I 12-stepped a kid when he was 19. His name was Raymond. And I took him to meetings and sponsored him and sponsored him and sponsored him. But Raymond never could get sober. 60 days was the longest he ever got. And this went on for 4 years. I got him out of jails and talked him out of acid trips and talked him down on and put him in 12-step houses and everything I could think of to do. And Raymond kept getting loaded. And one day I went to pick him up. I had him on a little flea bag hotel on South Figueroa, and I went up to get him because he wasn't down to meet me like he said he was going to be as usual. And I pushed open the door, and Raymond was lying on the bed with pills still undissolved in his mouth and an empty liquor bottle in his hand, and he was dead. He was 23. And as I stood over him, it dawned on me that I loved him. I loved him for nothing. I just wanted Raymond to be given what I had been given. I just wanted Raymond to have sobriety. And some of my anger returned. Where's your loving God? Why couldn't he give Raymond sobriety? You should see some of the people that I know that he gave sobriety to. Why couldn't he give it to Raymond? But by then I knew a little more about this thing, and so I went to Fred and talked about my anger, and I prayed angrily. And one day I went to a convention and I heard a guy speak. His name happened to be Raymond. And 2 weeks before his talk, his brother had died of alcoholism. And Raymond had been given the kind of generosity of spirit that occasionally occurs in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was willing to talk about his innermost feelings in public in the hopes that it would help somebody. So he talked about his brother's death. And as he did, one of the things he said is, "My brother died, but he doesn't have to drink anymore." And that sentence freed me. It made it possible for me to let go of Raymond, to let go of my resentment. On that weekend, I made a decision never to ask the question why. I don't know why. And I'm not going to know why. What I know is what is. And what I do with that is what matters. I've learned that all situations and circumstances are neutral. The only thing that matters is my reaction to them, what I do with them, what my response is. And so it became possible for me to look at you and see the light in you. And somehow, as the result of seeing the light in you, I feel the light in me. God comes to me through other people. Exactly the way Fred told me it would. The healing is incredible. If you ever get a chance, there's a little documentary on Mother Teresa that has a moment in it that is an actual miracle. You can watch a miracle occur. There is a man dying of starvation on a bed, and he has those spindly little tiny pencil-thin arms and legs, and the distended belly, and no flesh on his face, and the huge eyes, and he's in convulsions, and his eyes are rolled back in his head, and he's convulsing, and one of Mother Teresa's nurses is standing by the bed with her hand on his chest, not gently or sentimentally, but firmly on his chest, and she rubs him, and as she rubs him, the paroxysms begin to cease, and he begins to relax and get peaceful, and his eyes roll out of his head, and he searches around, and his eyes find hers, and they look at each other, and he is grateful, and she is loving. It's an incredible moment. And it always reminds me of Alcoholics Anonymous, which does exactly the same thing. We come in here twisted and torn and angry and fearful and vicious and distraught and alone. And AA puts his hand on us, not sentimentally, but firmly, and rubs our chest, and peace comes to us. There's an old-timer out my way that found some words that describe the fellowship for me better than any I've heard. They come from Gibran. It says, through the hands of such as these, God speaks, and from behind their eyes he smiles upon the earth. Now, I came to you feeling lonely, separate, different, angry, and afraid every day of my life. Drunk or sober, I always felt like that. My job was to keep you from finding it out. And if I work the steps, practice the principles, and live in the fellowship of the Spirit, I don't feel that way at all. Instead, I feel at one, at peace, and full of joy. And then I live in the infinite now. Thank you.